Puranjana becomes a woman in the next life. Text number 32 and 33 we are covering today. Okay, text number 32. Agastya praduhitaram upayeme dhrutavritam yasyam dhridachuto jata idmava hatmajo munihi. Agastya praduhitaram upayeme dhrutavritam yasyam dhridachuta jata idmavahatmajo munihi. Agastya praduhitaram upayeme dhrutavritam yasyam dhridachuto jata idmavahatmajo munihi. Word for word, Agastyaha, the great sage. Agastya. Prak, first. Duhitaram, daughter. Upayeme, married. Dhruta vritam, taken to vows. Yasyam, through whom. Dhridachutaha, named Dhridachuta. Jataha, was born. Idmavaha, named Idmavaha. Atmajaha, son. Munihi, the great sage. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Translation. The great sage named Agastya married the firstborn daughter of Malayadvaja, the avowed devotee of Lord Krishna. From her one son was born, whose name was Dhridachuta, and from him another son was born, whose name was Idmavaha. Purport. The name Agastya Muni is very significant. Agastya Muni represents the mind. The word Agastya indicates that the senses do not act independently, and the word Muni means mind. The mind is the center of all the senses, and thus the senses cannot work independent of the mind. When the mind takes to the cult of bhakti, it engages in devotional service. The cult of Bhakti, Bhakti Lata, is the first daughter of Malayadvaja. And as previously described, her eyes are always upon Krishna. One cannot render bhakti to any demigod. Bhakti can be rendered only to Vishnu. Shravanam Kirtanam Vishnoho. Thinking the absolute truth to be without form, the Mayavadis say that the word bhakti can apply to any form of worship. If this were the case, a devotee could imagine any demigod or any godly form and worship it. This, however, is not the real fact. The real fact is that bhakti can be applied only to Lord Vishnu and his expansions. Therefore, Bhakti Lata is Dhrida the great vow, for when the mind is completely engaged in devotional service, the mind does not fall down. If one tries to advance by other means, by Karma Yoga or Jnana Yoga, one will fall down. But if one is fixed in Bhakti, he never falls down. Thus, from Bhakti Lata, the son Dridachyuta is born. And from Dridachyuta, the next son Idmavaha is born. The word Idmavaha refers to one who carries wood for burning in a sacrifice when approaching a spiritual master. The point is that Bhakti Lata, the cult of devotion, fixes one in his spiritual position. One so fixed never comes down, and he begets children who are strict followers of the Shastric injunctions. As said in the Vedas, Tadvijnanartham sa gurumeva bigachet samitpani shrotriyam brahmanishtam. In the line of devotional service, those who are initiated are strict followers of the Vedic scriptural injunctions. 33. Let's do responsively one time. Vibhajya tanayebhya kshamam Rajarshir malayadvajaha Ari Radha Yishu Krishnam Sa Jagamukulachalam. Vibhajya, having divided, Tanayebhyaha, among his sons, Kshmam, the whole world, Raja Rishihi, the great saintly king, Malayadvaja, named Malayadvaja, Ariradhyushaha, desiring to worship Krishnam, Lord Krishna, Saha, he, Jagama, went, Kulachalam, unto Kulachala. After this, the great saintly king, Malayadvaja, divided his entire kingdom among his sons. Then, in order to worship Lord Krishna with full attention, he went to a solitary place known as Kulachala. Malayadvaja, the great king, was certainly a Mahabhagavata, topmost devotee. By executing devotional service, he begot many sons and disciples for propagating the Bhakti cult. Shravanam Kirtanam Vishnoho. Actually, the entire world should be divided among such disciples. Everyone should be engaged in preaching the cult of Krishna consciousness. In other words, when disciples are grown up and are able to preach, the spiritual master should retire and sit down in a solitary place to write and execute a Nirjana Bhajana. This means sitting silently in a solitary place and executing devotional service. This Nirjana Bhajana, which is a silent worship of the Supreme Lord, is not possible for a neophyte devotee. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur never advised a neophyte devotee to go to a solitary place or to engage in devotional service. Indeed, he has written a song in this connection. Dushtamana, Tumi Kisera Vaishnava. Pratishtara Tare Nirjanera Ghare. Tava Harinama Kevalo Kaitava. My dear Lord, my dear mind, what kind of devotee are you? Simply for cheap adoration, you sit in a solitary place and pretend to chant Hare Krishna, Mahamantra, but this is all cheating. Thus, Sri Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur advocated that every devotee, under the guidance of an expert spiritual master, preach the Bhakti cult. Krishna consciousness all over the world. Only when one is mature can he sit in a solitary place and retire from preaching all over the world. Following this example, the devotees of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness now renders service as preachers in various parts of the world. Now, they can allow the spiritual master to retire from active preaching work. In the last stage of the spiritual master's life, the devotees of the spiritual master should take preaching activities into their own hands. In this way, the spiritual master can sit down in a solitary place and render nirjana bhajana. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Namo Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Namine. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Desha Tarine. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gauravakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Mukam Karoti Vachalam Pangum Langete Yat Kripatamaham Vande Shri Gurum Dinataram Shri Chaitanya Ishwaram Paramananda Matram. Hare Krishna. So this is a strong chapter, strong section of the Bhagavatam, this whole Puranjana episode. So Puranjana, many things have been given very figuratively also in the whole section of this Bhagavatam. And Puranjana, then he was so attached to his wife, he was so attracted to the opposite sex that in his next life he became a woman. And there is a lot of instructive purports by Srila Prabhupada, very strong purports on how to be a proper gentleman and not get influenced by all these external factors. So when Puranjana went, even his prana went, and that is represented by Puranjana left, his soldiers left, and all these things. And so Puranjana is born in his next life as a woman, and he marries a devotee king, and his name is Malayadhvaja, right? He's the king Malayadhvaja. And so she got that benefit, Puranjana as that wife got the benefit of a devotee by being in the association of a devotee. And that's the greatness of the Sadhu Sangha association is also mentioned in those purports. And Prabhupada talks about the different acharyas. Somewhere he says, if I remember, that Ramanuja and Madhvacharya are in Sakyam Atma Nivedanam, right? Yeah. Of the 9, only 7 are mentioned here. And then he talks about Vaidhi Bhakti, Raghanuga Bhakti, and how the first 7 are in Vaidhi Bhakti. And he talks about Sakyam and Atma Nivedanam are more advanced. And he talks about how Ramanuja and Madhvacharya, somewhere I can't find that purport, are in Sakyam Atma Nivedanam. And then now he's come to this verse, Parikshit Maharaj, Shukadev Goswami, Suta Goswami, they're narrating this, how Malayadhvaja had a very beautiful daughter with black eyes, and that they say that her eyes was always upon the Supreme Lord Sri Krishna. And then this daughter marries the great sage Agastya Muni, and then they had a son named Dridachyuta, and from him another son, Idmavaha. And then Prabhupada in this purport begins to talk about the mind. As you know, the mind, I'll just share some things, and then I actually wanted to share some things from Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur's Bhagavatam lectures. I told you about this book last time. You have this? I don't know, in the ashram. This is all Bhagavatam lectures of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. Very hardcore, very, very beautiful. So some things on that I was reading and I thought I'll relate it to here. So anyway, so he starts talking about the mind. As you know, the mind is a seat of enjoyment. Without mind, the senses are of no use. Everywhere, everything the mind does. The mind is the most corrupt. Mind is the one which has collected all the vasanas for these 8.4 million years, 8.4 million species that we have gone through, 84 lakh species that we have gone through. The mind has collected all these vasanas and wanting to enjoy the different kinds of enjoyment. Even when we come to the process of bhakti, it is a mind which is always trying to tempt us and taunt us and attract us towards sense enjoyment. So that is why the senses are always looking for sense objects, how to enjoy certain things, how to enjoy. And so the mind is a seat of enjoyment that way. Mind also tries to corrupt us. saying this person did all these bad things, what is wrong if I do? Even though we know these instructions, because the mind, kama esha, krodha esha, is filled with all those kind of vasanas to enjoy. Sometimes the mind always wants to show I am a better devotee internally. Who am I? I'm a better devotee internally. It wants to show that my service is better than your service. This is all internal. Externally we may say, Prabhu, you're great. Internally we may want to. The whole idea of the world is, I want to be a better person. I want to show I'm a better person than you in our interaction. Internally, mainly internally. Externally we may make a false show. But that's how unfortunately, this wicked, crooked mind is. That's why Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur said, when you wake up, hit the mind with what, broom or shoes, something. And in the night you hit with broom. One morning or night. One is broom, one is shoes. Hit the mind, he says. No? Have you heard that? Hit the mind. Because bodily we can surrender with all these external symbols. But the mind is always very, very difficult to surrender. That's why he tells in this next purport, Dushta mana tumi kisera Vaishnava. Because this Vaishnava, this mind, always wants some kind of sense enjoyment. If not through the external senses, it wants through internal senses such as recognition, fame and name, glorification, how to show I am better, so all these things. And so the mind continues to pervert us in such a way that we even take to demigod worship, make a show of religion. Even in that way we want to show we are better. And then finally even take up to, Mayavadiism and all these things. Sometimes, I'm sure all of you have had experience, I've had this experience, that we come across these Mayavadis. When we are preaching that Krishna has a form, they try to say that is a lower form of worship. You can worship all these as Saguna Brahman, as they all have forms. But the higher form than that is Nirguna Brahman, that he is formless. So you can take any form. But then Krishna does not say like that in the Bhagavad Gita. He says, Matta parataram na anyat kinchidasti dhananjaya. There is nothing higher than me. How can you say that the impersonal Brahman is higher than him? Krishna himself boldly, Shri Shri Radha Vinod ki jai, Shri Jagannath Baladev Subhadra Maharani ki jai, Shri Shri Gaur Nitai ki jai. So Krishna is so clearly declared that he is the highest form. There is nothing higher than him. There is no demigod higher than him. And he has also declared in the later chapters that Brahmano hi pratishta aham, that the impersonal Brahman is resting on him. It is resting on him. So Bhakti Siddhanta Thakur writes here, this foolish conception of oneness of Brahman and the living entities are strongly refuted for many years. I mean, later in some of the lectures, he talks about how Vaishnavism was always existing. But here he begins refuted by Sri Ramanujacharya. The Supreme Lord Supreme Brahman is never influenced by Maya. This foolish mentality has to be removed. Let people's intelligence become pure and let them realize the necessity of devotional service. And he says, by discussing 10.2.33, we can understand the Lord eternally protects the existence of the living entities. Then he talks about, in this material world, we worship Ganapati to remove all obstacles, thinking that when they are removed, we will enjoy more freely. So again, it's always the mind, always directing us to do some activity which will give us enjoyment. Not only in materially, but even through religious ways. If I do worship Ganapati, I will be more, my sense of enjoyment will not get obstructed. If I do this, my sense of enjoyment will not get obstructed. I want to become a famous devotee so that I feel my ego is satisfied. This mentality is detrimental to devotional service. That is why, if we worship Mahavishnu Nrsimhadev, we can understand that the endeavor to remove obstacles is like the restlessness of a child. By worshipping Ganesha, one can attain material prosperity, which means that we can enjoy more. This material world is not a fit place for any gentleman. We should try to get out of this world. If instead of retiring from this material world, we work morning to evening for material advancement, what will we gain? We will either get money and women or be respected as a materially accomplished person. But then these three things are condemnable. And what is the use of liberation? Thirst for liberation means to think, let me become happy and let others suffer. Some people desire liberation in the form of merging into the existence of the Lord. Because otherwise they would have competition if they want to attain any other type of liberation. Just like in the Baul Sampradaya, Baul Sampradaya is one of the Sahajiya Sampradayas. There is a competition between one and other for the objects of enjoyment. In the Rasalila pastimes, the gopis did not think themselves to be co-wives of Krishna. Rather, each of them danced joyfully with her beloved Lord Krishna. Many married gopis left their husbands and relatives and came to the lotus feet of Krishna. The cheating mentality of the Mayavadis is exposed in the Rasalila arena. Only in the liberated state can one understand the sweetness of Supreme Lord Krishna. One should know who is the most suitable candidate for Krishna's mercy. To become a gopi or to become a leader of the gopis is not to be coveted, but to consider oneself a maidservant of Radhika is certainly the most desirable. So, and then he quotes several times this verse of Uddhava, that how, in Uddhava, there's a talk about how the gopis left their husbands, their families, and all these to worship Krishna, and he quotes that. Then here I'll go to another section of the Bhagavatam here. This is a very famous verse, 11th canto. Karmanam parinamitvad avirinchad amangalam vipaschin nashvaram pashyed adrishtam api drishtavat. An intelligent person should see that any material activity is subject to constant transformation, and that even on the planet of Lord Brahma there is simply unhappiness. Indeed, a wise man can understand that just as all that he has seen is temporary, similarly all things within the universe have a beginning and an end. So again he says, we feel happiness and distress in this world because we think ourselves to be the doers of everything. That's why we're feeling happiness and distress. Why? Because we think I am the doer. We reject distress by welcoming happiness. The function of the mind is sankalpa and vikalpa. And Prabhupada says in the purports, instead of doing sankalpa, vikalpa, we should focus our mind on the lotus feet of Krishna. That is a big thing. So, we reject distress by welcoming happiness. How does one feel happiness? To attain real happiness, one should cultivate Krishna consciousness. The feature of sweetness is superior to the feature of opulence. Relishing sweetness means to attain the shelter of the Haladani potency. We all possess a tiny portion of the Haladani potency. Our thirst for enjoying material happiness is the perverted form of the Haladani potency, because it's a reflection of the spiritual world. Anything here is but even the rasas we want to enjoy, the 5 rasas here, is all a perverted form of the Haladani potency. Somehow or other, we have to liberate ourselves from the material concept of life. We are cheating ourselves by thinking, I am the enjoyer and this world is meant for my enjoyment. Let everyone serve me. This mentality is a cheating mentality. Only the absolute truth can claim to be enjoyer. He is capable of fully enjoying. If we utilize all objects in the service of the Lord, our material desires in the form of I am the enjoyer will be cured. This material world has been created to test us. Animals cannot think, They are animals cannot think that they are not the enjoyers. Only human beings can think like that, if their intelligence is pure. The innumerable living entities that have no interest on meditating on the Supreme Lord are more or less animalistic. They are unable to understand the greatness and the supremacy of the Lord. However, if one receives the mercy of the most merciful Lord's Haladani potency, one can easily realize the sweetness of the personality of Godhead. Therefore, Sri Rupa Goswami has glorified the Supreme Lord in the verse beginning with Anarpita Charim Chirat. You know that verse? Anarpita Charim Chirat, that no one has ever come before to give the love of God like Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He prayed that Sri Chaitanya Deva, who had mercifully distributed his own devotional service, might appear in our hearts. So again, he keeps condemning this concept of the mind enjoying through, I am the doer, I'm experiencing happiness and distress because I am the doer, and all these things. And then, there's one more I wanted to go to, two more. Bhagavad Gita has declared that those who impose trouble on themselves are in the mode of ignorance. It is as if they're trying to be happy by slapping themselves. Such people do not make any progress in spiritual life, and those who want to remain aloof from the actual truth of life because of a desire for fame are also not intelligent. The whole day of such people is spent accumulating unwanted things. When one has sufficient wealth, he still tries to cheat people and accumulate more and more. People think as follows: let the relatives of other people die of starvation, but my relatives should remain safe and healthy. If one endeavors for material advancement, one is bound to face many difficulties. Therefore, one should give up all material endeavors and utilize his entire time to achieve the ultimate goal of life. We should not set aside Srimad Bhagavatam and instead accept other religious scriptures. Moral scriptures and scriptures in the mode of goodness has setting the standard of human existence. It will bring the society into the clutches of mode of passion and ignorance. This is happening in Europe and America. If one discusses the 11th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, one will know that one's situation under the mode of goodness can be destroyed with the help of mode of passion, and that the influence of mode of passion can be eliminated only with the help of mode of goodness. Sorry, ignorance there. It is only with the help of mode of pure goodness that one can transcend the influence of mixed passion and ignorance. So what is the definition of mode of passion? A person who is under the mode of passion thinks, I am very great, I am expert, I am a member of so-and-so society. My duty is to help suffering humanity by supplying them relief in so many ways. I am helping people, and so society should reimburse me by supplying enough compensation for my material enjoyment. We see somewhere in the previous purports also Prabhupada wrote about the negative effects of altruism, philanthropy, these political welfare activities, social welfare, and how bhakti is the highest in that one. So here's another beautiful one actually. This is what I wanted to get to about the Ekayana system. He talks here because here Prabhupada writes in the purport, the cult of bhakti is only applied to Lord Vishnu. It cannot be rendered to any other devata. So Bhakti Siddhanta Thakur here says that the Srimad Bhagavatam is not to be approached by people who are simply interested in the four goals of life, which is dharma, artha, kama, moksha. But the other is the fifth objective of life, which is prema. Only those who are busy with the four objectives of life cannot benefit completely by studying Srimad Bhagavatam. On the other hand, one whose goal of life is to love Krishna can actually profit from studying Srimad Bhagavatam. When one realizes that the love of God is supreme objective of life, he feels a need to study Srimad Bhagavatam. We have heard from the teachings of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu that the 5 limbs are most prominent: Sadhu Sangha, Nama Kirtana, this Bhagavata Shravana, Mathura Vasa, and Sri Murti Sevaya, Shraddhaya Sevana. And then he quotes the other one: Sakala Sadhana Shrestha E Pancha Anga Krishna Prema Janmaya E Panchera Alpasanga. These 5 limbs of devotional service are the best of all. Even a slight performance of these awaken love for Krishna. This should be our ultimate goal of life. Simply by a little cultivation of these 5 practices, one can attain the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord. Many of them, these politicians, social welfare activities, they all take up to different kinds of religious work to make a show off, to make their own, they have to progress in their own political life or whatever. So, which Prabhupada talks about before. And then Bhagavatam says a beautiful verse: Nehayat karma dharmaya. You know that verse? Nehayat karma dharmaya na viragya kalpate. Na viragaya kalpate. Na tirtha padasevaye jivan api mrito hi saha. That if one's work does not elevate him to religious life, and that religious ritualistic performance does not raise him to renunciation, and finally that does not lead one to devotional service to the Supreme Lord, then he must be considered, although he's breathing, he's a dead person. Very strong, na? So although he's living, he's considered to be a dead person. So that's why all kinds of philanthropy, all these things which the mind enjoys, is all condemned. So Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur says, in the previous ages, people had a desire to worship, and they understood the importance of ascertaining the proper object of their worship. But in course of time, the worshipable objects and process of worship became many, and so people's destinations also became various. This is how the worship of many gods came into being. In ancient times, there was only one community. One community, ancient times. That was the Hamsa community. The best among those were known as Paramahamsa, or travelers on the path of spiritual life. Previously, Vaishnavas were referred to as Paramahamsa. When we study the ancient history of the Bhagavata Sampradaya, we come to know about these Hamsas and Paramahamsas. They followed a process that was known as Ekayana. Have you heard this word? Maybe you have heard. Ekayana. They followed a process known as Ekayana. Because Srimad Bhagavatam was the subject matter for discussion of Paramahamsas, it is also known as Paramahamsa Samhita. Samhita refers to a compiled literature. The accumulation of knowledge from 5 different sources, Pushkara, Hayashirsha, and Narada Prancharatra are all in this category. A worshipper of the Supreme Lord is known as Bhagavata. I am speaking about the time previous to when Sri Vyasadeva had spoken Srimad Bhagavatam to Sri Shukadev Goswami. Bhagavatam was recited at least 3 times, we know. Vyasa recited to Shukadev Goswami. Shukadev Goswami recites it to Parikshit Maharaj. And then Sutta Goswami recites it to the Naimisharanya sages. And those Naimisharanya sages also, the story. They all trying to see what is the actual dharma for Kali Yuga. How can people be happy in Kali Yuga? And then they do so many yagnas to various forms of worship. And then they do so many yagnas. And from all those yagnas, it is said their body simply became black from all that carbon, whatever, it became black. And so they approached Brahma, right? They approached Brahma for what is the actual means of relief. And he gives that spinning wheel, if I remember correct, right? That spinning wheel. And then that spinning wheel brings them to Naimisharanya. And that is why there is something called a Chakra Tirtha there. If I'm wrong, you just correct me from my... it brings them to Chakra Tirtha, and that is where they approach Suta Goswami, and then they inquire from him, and he speaks Bhagavatam. So that's how. So Vedavyas compiled these Puranas to make the understanding of the Vedas easy. Puranas are full of ancient histories. So Puranas are itihasas, history. It is not a mythology. They all really actually happened. Srimad Bhagavatam, composed by Sri Vyasadeva, is also one of the Puranas. So and then he continues to say there are two main branches of the Vedas, the Ekayana branch and the Vahvayana branch. The sages who belong to the Chuta Gotra, not Achyuta, but the Chuta Gotra, are counted as members of the Vahvayana branch. And those who belong to the Achyuta Gotra are counted as members of the Ekayana branch. These two branches are completely different from each other. In the Ekayana system, the worship of the one Supreme Lord is encouraged. When the understanding of spiritual truth becomes distorted in due course of time, the divisions of the Varnas and Vedas come into existence. You have read this in the Bhagavatam, how after Satya Yuga, in the next Yuga, they got divided, Varnas got divided, the Vedas got divided. Before Treta Yuga, there was no division of Varnas. Everyone was in the category of Hamsa. As enviousness towards Vaishnavas gradually became prominent, the Vedas were divided, and the one community of Hamsa became divided into different Varnas, headed by the Brahmanas. Let me go back to ancient times, Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur says. The Hamsa community used to live in the part of present-day Asia that is situated near the Kashyapa lake, known as Caspian Sea. At that time, they were known as Aryans because they were engaged in the worship of demigods such as fire god. They considered the worship of Lord Vishnu to be similar to that of the worship of demigods. Of course, by knowing the hierarchy, Taratamya, they do that. Worship of the Devatas along with the offering of prayers is found in various scriptures such as the Vedas and the Samhitas. One who wants to properly understand Srimad Bhagavatam should know this. Otherwise, one will certainly consider Bhagavatam to just be another medieval book. Srimad Bhagavatam is the only Veda that propounds the Ekayana system. Words like Ekayana, Mahabharata and Pancharatra are found in the Upanishads. If one studies the history of the world before the appearance of Srimad Bhagavatam, he will know that human beings were civilized worshippers of the Supreme Lord even before the time of Rig Veda. People in ancient times were spontaneous devotees of Lord Vishnu, and they remained focused in the philosophy of Vaishnavism. In the beginning of Treta Yuga, the Ekayana system became obscured and the Vedas were divided. The Ekayana system is more or less extinct at present, but if a study of carefully is made, one will come to the conclusion that before the Vedic age, the devotional service to Lord Vishnu was prominent among people. Other paths and opinions began to spread only from the beginning of Treta Yuga. It is not that there were Buddhists and Jains in our country long ago. In ancient times, there were devoted Brahmanas that were only interested in the topics of devotional service to Lord Vishnu. Descendants of these Brahmanas identify themselves as Shashvatis or Shatashatis, which is corruption of the word Satvati. So anyway, he goes on. Before the arrival of the 5 kinds of Brahmana from Kanyakubja, there were many Sattvatas or Vaishnavas, Brahmanas in Bengal. And due to the strong influence of the atheistic philosophy of Buddhism, the spreading of Vaishnava religion became more or less checked. So he continues then, and yet despite facing various obstacles, the ancient religion is again being propagated extensively by the mercy of the Lord. So those who turn up their noses in contempt whenever they hear the word Puranas should discuss what the pious people who lived prior to the Vedic age used to cultivate. Puranas, especially Srimad Bhagavatam, is not meant for those who turn up their nose in contempt. Srimad Bhagavatam was first spoken by Narayana to the great sage Narada, and then to Vyasa, and then to Shukadev, and then, he continues how this Paramahamsa, and then Shukadev spoke it, and all these things. So anyway, so back to this verse here. So the mind is always the seat of enjoyment. Mind is the most corrupted, and mind is always the one which is providing so many obstacles on the path of bhakti. So Bhakti Lata, that's why here even Puranjana, you see he got the association of his husband when he became a woman, and then they had a pure devotee here. Prabhupada writes, one who's in bhakti never falls down, and one who's fixed never falls down. And he begot children who are strict followers of bhakti and shastra. And then they continue to say that after this, the great sage, King Malayadvaja, divided his entire kingdom among his many sons. We see even in recent cosmology seminar we all attended, and even in the Bhagavatam 5th canto, how Prithu Maharaja divided that whole into 7 islands for 7 various descendants. And then Jambudvipa is divided into what, 9 or 11, and then they are further divided for all these descendants. So similarly, Malayadvaja divided his entire kingdom among his sons. So there was a joke that day that, everything got so divided, finally we have only 30-40 side remaining for us. So anyway, so like this they kept dividing, and then he went to a solitary place. All the great people, even you see in Bhagavatam, Kardama Muni and Malayadvaja, and all these people, once they had very, very capable disciples and descendants and followers, they all went to do Nirjana Bhajana, which Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur doesn't recommend for neophytes like us, because our mind is never a devotee. A mind is dushtamana tumi kisera vaishnava. Cultivation of the mind is a long process for many of us, many neophytes, maybe quick for some of you. But so he recommends that we should preach by following the footsteps of our acharyas like Prabhupada and Bhaktisiddhanta Thakura, and go all over the world. And that's how International Society for Krishna Consciousness is spreading. And because of all these instructions, you can see today ISKCON is a very big movement. We have so many followers. Prabhupada said this Bhagavatam will cause the re-spiritualization of the society, right as introduction, which is what is happening. No Vaishnava Sampradaya is able to keep up with the preaching of ISKCON because of how strongly they've emphasized Bhakti and Bhagavatam. And so that's why, following in their footsteps, we have to continue preaching. Okay, Hare Krishna. Any questions, comments? Any questions they will answer, comments you can share. But if you don't have this book, it's a very good book. You've seen it? This is all the Srimad Bhagavatam lectures of Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur. Actually, I got this in the US. In India, I don't find it at all. US, we get all these things. Bhagavad Tatparya. About 32 lectures. It was recorded in Bengali by Sundar Anand Vidya Vinod. And then it was translated into English by Bhumipati and Purna Pragna. Huh? Monotheism. Monotheism and pantheism. Correct, yeah. Monotheism. I didn't think like that, yeah. Good point. Yeah. Yeah, in the US, at least my office people used to think we have 33 crore I'm worshipping, you're pantheistic. Yeah, they call us pantheistic people, yeah. Yes, true. Could be there to a slighter extent compared to mode of passion and mode of ignorance. Mode of goodness, let's say someone is a scholar of Vedic Shastras. He may have that sense that I studied it, I did it. Could be there to a subtle way. Because you see, scholars, they never agree with each other. Only I am a better scholar, he doesn't know anything. Any Sanskrit scholar you take, they can't agree only with each other. So it could be there in a slight way that I have the capacity, I've got it through my brain intelligence could be there. Small way, I feel. Sonagor Hari Prabhu may have an opinion, or Swami Prakash Prabhu. He's asking in mode of goodness, doership will be there. I thought in a slight way, small way it can be there. I'm a good musician. I'm a good kirtanier. Could be there. I know better harmonium than others. I know how to play chords. He doesn't know. You know. So mridanga, I know these stunts. You know, so it could be there probably. Any other questions? No questions. Okay. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki